When we exposed this, their response wasn't an apology and saying, "Oh, we need to fix this." Their response was to go and illegally access government records to find out where we live and where we work.
O ye mountains high, where the clear blue sky arches over the vales of the free, where the pure breezes blow and the clear streamlets flow, how I've longed to your bosom to flee. O Zion, dear Zion, land of the free.
This is Ben McClintock and Enoch Moore of DefendingUtah.org, where we think right and wrong, not right and left. Don't forget to subscribe to the Defending Utah YouTube channel. You can also find us on Spreaker, iTunes, and iHeartRadio.
Welcome back to the Liberty Lineup Radio Show, second hour with Sherilyn Eager and Ben and Enoch with Defending Utah. This hour, we are going to have two important leaders, Dr. Scott Bradley and Sheriff Richard Mack, duke it out on their differences on the land issues. Stay with us. We want to remind our listeners that KTALK has a brand new facelift, and we are now KTALK Media, KTALKmedia.com. Download the app KTALK Radio and listen to us anywhere you are around the globe where there is internet. And we want to send you to the brand new website, KTALKmedia.com, where you can get news and weather. And you also will find the community calendar. We want to remind you that this is your community and your calendar. You can actually upload your own nonprofit or free community events right now. And by the way, tomorrow evening, we just want to remind you that in Highland, Utah, at the city building, there will be an important event taking place, which is the ex-CIA asset, Susan Lindauer, who spent time in jail for speaking the truth on warning the federal government and the Obama administration that there would, the Bush administration, hello, I got to get back a few years. She warned the Bush administration that there was going to be an attack on the Twin Towers in the Pentagon. And she was ignored, and when she came out with fists a-blazing to try and tell the world what had happened, she was, of course, then determined to be mentally disabled, and in other words, crazy person. Mm-hmm. And then she was thrown into jail. But anyway.
Whistleblowers silenced. That's amazing.
Whistleblower silence.
Shocking.
Can you imagine that?
Truth is treason in the empire of
lies. Yeah,
right?
and then tomorrow on our radio show, we're actually going to have Pete Santilli and Deb Jordan, who will be speaking to what happened to him up at the Malheur Refuge and his long-term incarceration, 8 months, and suddenly the eve before his hearing, he was told just this week that they had no evidence against him, and they released him. So we have to ask questions about what's happening, but I don't want to take any more time away from our two very respected guests that we appreciate so much, and we will welcome to the show now Sheriff Richard Mack and our Constitution Party vice presidential candidate, Scott Bradley.
A couple of weeks ago, we had Sheriff Mack speaking about his training event, which we had several of our members actually attend, and it's a great event. And what Sheriff Mack is involved with the getting sheriffs to recognize their powers is a very important thing. And
very good things.
We didn't have enough time to get into a topic that we had asked him about, and so we had to move on from that. And we wanted to be able to have two great constitutional people and patriots that might not be on the same side as this issue. Scott Bradley, we really appreciate his work with Freedom's Rising Sun and what he does with helping people understand the original intent of the Constitution. So thank you both, Sheriff Mack and Dr. Bradley.
Hey, no problem. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm anxious and curious to see if I'm actually, quote, duking it out with Scott Bradley on this, but we'll see. Let's just remember how many people are on the show that have actually been a sheriff.
There you go.
How many? I don't know of any other sheriff but you, Richard, that we can trust as much as we have you, and so we appreciate all the good work you do.
No problem.
I'd have to chime in too. This is Scott. Obviously, I was at Richard's CSPOA training. Fine presentation of great and magnificent principles. I love Richard like a brother, and I would hope we wouldn't duke it out either. I hope we can, exchange information and try and increase understanding.
If we duke it out a little bit, that's what brothers do sometimes.
That's right. Just keep it above the belt.
All right, you guys, I just had to set it up there for you. We know that, good people have differences, and so that's what we're here to talk about and see where this goes. But
I thought it'd be good if Enoch and I kind of step back, and it'd be good for the both of you to talk about this. So HB 276 is the topic. It was the Land Management Act, and there's a couple of different issues that were controversial. One was about making other police agencies the primary agency, and other aspects of it, creating a bureaucracy. And so what I wanted to do is maybe have you, Dr. Bradley, kind of give an overview of the issues of it, and then we can kind of have you, Sheriff Mack, talk about maybe some of the things that you like with it, or that you disagree with it, or that you are okay with because of whatever reason it is. So let's go ahead and start with you, Scott.
Okay, great. There's hardly time in an hour to even begin to look at it. The enrolled copy of House Bill 276 was 933 lines, 34 pages of legalese. I mean, literally, and it violates a lot of the premise that the Founding Fathers used in terms of simplicity of law and so on and so forth. But basically what this does, now I know that there's been a lot said, probably even on your program, in regards to the issue of the sheriff and other police agencies and everything. And I've always said, when I've looked at this, that was maybe 10% of my concern. I mean, and that's an arbitrary number. I mean, it may be 12, or it might be 15, or it might be 8. I don't know. But the fact of the matter is, I have problems with this bill on every single level. Now, I've met briefly with the sponsor of the bill, and I've made presentations around the state, including to some legislators. And so my position is, I think, fairly well known on the issues. It's a grave concern about the fact that we are basically trading one tyrant for another, the BLM for the DLM. And they're almost synonymous in what they do and what it does. The bill was designed to assume management of federal lands as they come back to the state in the event that happens. When the first 100,000 acres come back, we were supposed to have this bill kick in. By the way, it became law. It was signed by the governor on the 28th of March of this year. So I personally believe it should have been vetoed. I personally believe that we need to revisit it. I am concerned for a lot of reasons. Some people say, but we're bringing it closer to home. We're going to have it, instead of the feds manage it, we'll have the state manage it. And I say, well, hopefully that's a good thing, but a tyrant can be a tyrant in as small a kingdom as a household. If the head of household is a tyrant, that makes the subjects, if you will, as miserable as if there were a tyrant farther away. And in fact, in some ways, it's even more onerous. But what this does is it creates a division of land management that becomes the lord and master, if you will, of all federal lands returned. It creates the laws that are associated with it, and we'll talk about what's included in those laws. and that violates the constitutional protocol. The legislature is the only one to create the laws. I've talked to legislators about this, and we could explain why they say they allow this to happen in violation of protocol. But they create the laws, they police the laws, they enforce the laws, they adjudicate the laws, including fines and so on and so forth. And according to James Madison, that kind of condition is the very definition of tyranny, when you have the legislative, the executive, and the judicial all rolled into one body. And it's interesting how all-inclusive their power is. And I don't want to take too much time from Richard, because obviously I tend to be the talkative one, and that's a problem. But the problem is that their power is all-inclusive. Under all circumstances, they create the laws on everything from camping and nut gathering and rock gathering and hiking and access. And
hey, Scott, I don't mean to interrupt you. I want to make sure and we get Richard enough time before we just kind of wrap up kind of the key bullet points of just in like the next 15, 30 seconds.
Okay, here's what it does. Division of Land Management's created. It defines all the powers that land management is to have. They take ownership and control of federal lands. They create all regulations. They establish fees for access and use of the land. They create an independent policing agency. They have the power to enforce their regulations on the land. They have the power to adjudicate through administrative hearings, an internal court system, if you will, and they have power over any private land transfer over 200 acres. So they become the all-powerful law, and they wrote the law in such a way that whoever gets the philosophy of the department, and so it's an environmentalist or whomever it is, takes control of that. And we've got examples of in the state of the Division of Air Quality, for example.
So essentially, Scott, this new DLM becomes judge, jury, and executioner. Am I paraphrasing that fairly?
It's pretty accurate, I think. Yes.
Okay.
And so the sheriff issue to me is just a small part of the whole problem.
It's the man that enforces what's going on. So Sheriff-Mack, kind of give your intro on this.
Well, I didn't mind at all. I was very interested in what Scott had to say, and I didn't mind if he took up the entire first segment, because I was very interested in what he presented. And I think that we've glossed over something he said, and I think we've been a little bit too negative in looking at this entire bill, because Scott just said something that is totally amazing and astonishing and epic in its proportions relative to Utah taking back federal lands. Now that's just humongous. That's not happening anyplace else, and so we have to tip our hats to the state of Utah for taking back some federal land, and that's what they've been trying to do for quite some time. Now, I agree totally with Scott that the simplicity of the bill is lacking in this, and that's where Representative Noel, who I have a lot of respect for, I think he made a mistake there. And I think he also made a mistake not turning this lands over to the counties to manage. And the first thing the counties are going to say is, we already have too much to do, and the sheriff already has too much to do, and all the sheriffs are going to agree with that. But if the monies used for the state were actually sent to the counties, I think it would be cheaper, and I think it would be much better managed, and it would be closer to the people, just like Jefferson said the government is supposed to be. And then we would, I think, have a much freer bill and a much more user-friendly bill and a we the people bill. But there had to be something, I believe there had to be some sort of compromise from the state in order to take these lands back in the first place. And let's face it, compromises have been a part of Utah since it became a state. And there were huge compromises when it became a state, even done by Mormon leaders to become a state. And I think we compromised way too much to become a state.
Okay, so we're heading right to a break there. So we've got the overview from Scott, Judge, Jury, and Executioner, HB 276, and then Sheriff Mack talking about the importance of compromise, and maybe the bill needs to be simpler, and we need to have the counties be in control of the land. Just kind of overviewing real briefly. And we'll get back more about this, or when we get back shortly from the break, and more from Richard Mack and Dr. Scott Bradley.
Online at KTALKmedia.com.
Why do you think that a recession is coming? Just how bad is it going to be?
Many free market economists predicted it would come and worried about it.
I think it's going to be pretty bad, and whether it starts in 07 or 08, I think is immaterial, and I also think it's going to last not just for quarters, but for years.
There's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path. The smart money was warning of the 08 housing and market crash, but did we move our 401ks or IRAs? No, because we didn't know for sure. And you have penalties and huge roadblocks. Today, we know better. Today, we have AccuPlan. They can set up a self-directed IRA or 401k and more. When we say go, in as little as 30 days, our 401k or IRA is in a new structure, one we control. Now we can use that structure for land or property, physical precious metals, ownership in a company we know locally, or our own startup. AccuPlan builds the structure. We control and have access to what we put into it. Visit them online and learn more about your options at AccuPlan.net. That's ACCUplan.net. AccuPlan, builders of financial freedom.
They have rabbits, chickens, sheep, and cows. Heck, they probably have Bigfoot.
I give my blue ribbon to a funnel cake I got. It can feed a family of 12 or me.
Churro, double-fisted. I ate a submarine sandwich the size of a submarine. You might weigh 10 more pounds.
Get the blues at the Utah State Fair, September 8th through the 18th. For more information, go to utahstatefair.com.
Hi, it's Sherilyn Eager with the Liberty Lineup Show. As a mom and a grandma, I really care about my family's health. Over the years, I've been the one to find the doctors and services. So if you're like me, I was deeply troubled by the Obamacare mandate and its invasion of my privacy. But now, I've found an alternative that gives me and my family freedom from insurance. It's called Medical Cost Share, and we absolutely love it. Medical Cost Share exempts us from the Obamacare mandate, including the IRS penalties. And we can choose and keep our doctors and hospitals because there are no networks, no HMOs, no PPOs, and we can take it with us anywhere in the country. It even includes naturopathic and other alternative treatments. I love that the shared expenses do not include abortion services or other socially objectionable practices. And the best part is it costs a whole lot less. For a special offer for our listeners, go to medicalcostshare.com/opt-out now. That's medicalcostshare.com/opt-out now. It's not insurance, it's better.
Call connected through the NSA. Complete transmission through the NSA. Suspending.
Welcome back to the Liberty Lineup Radio Show. I'm Sherilyn Eager in studio today with Ben and Enoch, who are the Naked Truth guys with Defending Utah. And we have with us two very respected leaders in the movement to get our lands back and get our sheriffs back and to be more constitutional. And as always, there are differences of opinion, and we're exploring those differences in a venue that we can get all of the ideas and issues and points out there for everyone to consider. And I especially want to thank both of you, Scott Bradley and Sheriff Richard Mack, for being here with us today.
Well, that's okay, and I'd just like to follow up with one other reiteration.
Hang on. Before we go forward here, we gave a lot of time to Scott Bradley. So, Sheriff Mack, go ahead and finish up your thoughts there.
Well, I just wanted to wrap up one thing and reiterate that this is an amazing step that Utah has taken in taking over federal lands, and we need to do that 99.9% more. And they've been exemplary in that regard. And Utah has done some great things, but for the most part, their legislature is far too shall we say, trying to emulate Washington, D.C. And they need to follow the Constitution, and they need to follow the state Constitution, and they need to follow principles of liberty, and that's what we all agree on here. But let's not ignore or sidestep the fact that Utah is taking back federal land. That's absolutely unprecedented. It's amazing. It's wonderful. And I think they've made a mistake somewhat in trying to do this. I don't believe in establishing a new bureaucracy to do this or a law enforcement arm to do it. And I've said for years that the counties can manage their own lands. And, of course, many people have said, well, where would they get the money? Well, it would come from where it is right now. We would stop sending it to Washington, D.C. to manage our lands, and then we would have to stop sending it to Salt Lake City in Utah specifically to do everything from the capital and disseminate those funds to the counties to run all lands in their counties. And getting people and volunteers involved and having the county residents be able to clear the land with for firewood and deadwood and make the Boy Scouts and community organizations and hunters all a part of taking care of the forests and lands. And that is something we can do together. It doesn't always have to be government running everything. And that's the problem that this whole bill presents to me. I don't believe that it's a big slap at the sheriffs. I've read the comments from the sheriffs about the bill. But I also think that sheriffs in not just Utah, but all over the country don't recognize, as Scott said earlier, don't recognize their power and responsibilities as much as they should. And that's where CSPOA comes in, and we're doing it full time. And now, as our training exemplified 2 weeks ago, that we're trying to get people involved in that process of making sure that their sheriffs know and understand their authority. And as we talked about briefly the last time I was on the show, I believe that Utah sheriffs have made a huge mistake and a huge excuse saying that their office was, the office of sheriff was established by the state legislature, and they kind of use that as an excuse as not getting too aggressive in the enforcement of the Constitution. And I believe that's all it is a flimsy excuse. It means nothing because their oath of office is what means something to the establishment of their jobs and positions. And it also describes what they are supposed to do as sheriff, whether they were formed by the state, established by the state, or authorized by the state. It really makes no difference. They have a moral and spiritual obligation to keep their oath of office and to exercise their authority and power to prevent the people of their counties and the people of Utah from being victimized by any government, whether it's state or local, county, city, whatever, or federal. Their responsibility is to protect and defend their citizens. And I believe that there's a couple of real minor things that could happen to this bill that could make it a huge freedom bill. And I just don't know if the state of Utah has the guts to do it, but I believe that Mike Noel does. And I think if we pointed those out, he would probably make those little changes. And anyway, I'd be willing to work with him on accomplishing that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sheriff Mack. Now, Scott Bradley, I know we lost you for a second. Did you catch that? And what do you have a comment on what Sheriff Mack said?
Well, I'm sure he had some great comments. I mean, and I'm sure they were well thought because I think he really wants liberty and proper government just like we all do. But I didn't get it all. But just as a few little thoughts that I might throw out, and I think it goes along with Richard's general premise with his organization, the idea of the sheriffs. And they're the peace officer that the people select. That's close to the people. They're people that are to be trusted by the people. If we had a decent electorate out there, we would choose sheriffs that were not tyrants, that were not simply automatons walking through enforcement of the law, but recognized, the cause of liberty also. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the problems I have with this. And again, it's just one of the many problems that we have with this, is putting together a police agency that's independent of the voice of the people and basically insulated away from what the people can do. I had a very amicable meeting with Representative Noel. He's a very cordial, and we had a great exchange. And he did tell me that it was the work in progress, and they would be willing to change it. My position at this point is there are so many fatal flaws. I would like to see a revamp from the foundation up, and I would like to see this thing being brought closer to the people. Richard's already talked a little bit about that, I think. But what they did, and they told me that they had to make friends in the bill to assure it would pass. And so they put together a conglomerate of interests. And if you read lines 190 through 196, you'll find that they wanted to recognize the state's needs. They wanted the quality of scientific, scenic, historical, ecological, environmental, air, atmospheric, water, archaeological, natural conditions, food and habitat for fish, wildlife, domestic animals, outdoor recreation. Oh, there's human occupancy and other human use. Last on the list was the human thing, and this idea that they had to make friends to get it to pass, and people say you should never watch sausage or laws be made. This is a concern, because if the philosophy of the Division of Land Management is captured by those like the Division of Air Quality, which is just a baby, maybe not even a baby, because they're close to us, Environmental Protection Agency, I'm very concerned that this all-encompassing bureaucracy that makes the law, enforces the law, adjudicates the law, and people say, oh, you can always take it outside the court once it's gone through their system. Us regular citizens don't have unlimited pockets to do that. They have state money, which comes out of taxpayers' pockets, so it's, in their mind, unlimited. Those of us that have to resist these things find that we're drained of resources before we get to that point. I would like to see this brought to a point where it's an admirable thing. We shouldn't have to fight for the land. We should have had transferred back in 1896. We're in that condition now. We're trying to do that, and that's an admirable thing. I really, truly believe, though, that this, as it sits right now, is an onerous bill. I mean, you think about it, a simple definition of socialism is government ownership and or control of the means of production and distribution. Well, land is the primary instrument of production and distribution. Land is the primary source of wealth, whether it's mineral, timber, water, food production, whatever. Well, that definition is not staying at the national level only. It's at the state level, too.
Right. Hey, Scott?
Yes.
So one of the points that Sheriff Mack made, I wanted to get your thoughts on, was that this is large swaths of land that might be too much for the local county or the local sheriff to be able to handle, and so that's why the DLM and the DWR would be given primary law enforcement authority. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Certainly. Who says those swaths of land have to have the boundaries that go beyond county lines and everything? Say, oh, this is a chunk of land, this county's going to take this, and this county's going to take it. Why do we have to keep them in monolithic form? I mean, this single, kind of blob of land that covers 15 counties. I mean, and honestly, some of this land is huge because the national government has usurped the original intent of the founders to have the land in the hands of the people. So I really, truly believe there's nothing that says you can't say this ends at the county line and that starts at the county line or some other such thing. I really, truly believe that a law enforcement officer, and I use the wrong terms in a way, enforcement, if that's the mentality that people take, and that's what I'm afraid that the enforcement people of the DLM will take, instead of the peacekeeper, the sheriff, the people, it's their neighbor. And maybe you say, oh, well, these guys work in the area too, but they answer to a different hierarchy. I really believe that the counties truly, or even, why not individuals ultimately? Let's make a transition. But with their friends that they've made with this, they've almost assured that this will never pass to the hands of the people. And the hands of the people is what the founders always intended. We were to manage our affairs, try, buy, sell, fail, whatever, in our own ways. And we could talk at length about the idea of stewardship and the responsibility that comes with that. Mm-hmm. Government has always been a horrid steward of land.
That's for sure. Their record on the stewardship of land, especially in communist countries where they've got control, or you can even look to what's happened recently with the rivers, the EPA leaking toxic waste into the rivers.
Here in Utah.
Yeah. Right, and ran right through Utah. Sheriff Mack, I wanted to get your thoughts on this, about how instead of making an unelected bureaucracy the primary police authority, the sheriff would maintain that, and then they'd be able to delegate their authority to these bureaucracies to help them out instead of subordinating their authority.
Well, I don't think it does that. If you read the actual bill, it says, in fact, the Sheriff's Association says plain and simply that the bill does not usurp the authority of the sheriff as the chief law enforcement officer. The law states that, quote, except as provided in subsections 4B and C, the local county sheriff is the primary law enforcement authority with jurisdiction on public land to enforce this chapter and rules issued by the director pursuant to subsection 1. So they're not trying to kick the sheriff out, and in fact, the sheriff would, in my view, would have to be clearly involved to make sure that, again, this bureaucracy is not violating the rights of the people and being too onerous in any enforcement that they do have authority to do. The bill also has a DWR has primary law enforcement responsibility only for protected wildlife in the state of Utah. So, yeah, I'm sure the sheriff doesn't want to be the wildlife cop. And this is current law and was not changed by the language of this legislation. DWR already has primary authority to enforce Title 23 of the state of Utah. So I believe that they ought to change a little bit of language there. I believe that the sheriffs and counties should be much more involved in this entire bill, and if they revamp the whole thing, as Scott suggested, I personally don't think they have to revamp the whole thing. I think they could change this and make it a very good bill without doing that, but it's fine with me if they do. And
Gotcha.
Like I said, I'd be willing to work with them on that.
Right.
But I think we're leaning too much towards this kind of this idea that this is removing the sheriff from the entire process and creating this judge, jury, and executioner law enforcement, and it does not. I don't believe that at all. Do I trust bureaucracies, state or federal? No. Do they have to have accountability? Yes. And that's the problem with bureaucracies, is they simply have a problem with accountability, fairness, and being far too officious in the treatment of the citizens. And so that's why I would really like to see the sheriffs much more involved in this bill and much more involved in the oversight of the enforcement of this bill. But I think there's still some things there that we're making too much a deal about, and that is that it's supposedly removing the sheriff, and it's not.
All right, and, gentlemen, we're coming very close to a break, and this is going to continue after the break, if you both are willing and able.
Sure.
Okay, so we are with Sheriff Richard Mack and Vice Presidential candidate Scott Bradley with the Constitution Party. And the discussion here is over the Utah bill, SB 276. Excuse me. And we've had some interesting points brought up by both. I do have a question about the animal, the wild animal part of this. The wildlife. And that is because the Bundys face this very situation in Nevada right now, that the tortoises have to be protected, and tortoises and cows, as we all know, don't get along. But apparently they do, because tortoises love to eat cow pies. So we have the environmentalists that are all in the middle of this, and I see the animal issue as being a big deal. So when we get back from the break, gentlemen, let's just, chat about that piece of this legislation that's being handed over to a higher authority for arbitration and enforcement. We'll be right back after this break. Cheryl and Eager with Ben and Enoch from the defendingutah.org.
The all-new KTALK Media. Online at KTALKmedia.com.
I recently met with a homeowner who was ready to retire but felt trapped in his job because his retirement funds had gone down substantially over the last few years, and he needed the income from his job to make payments on his home. In reviewing his options, he realized a reverse mortgage would pay off his current loan, give him some money to take care of much-needed repairs, and eliminate his monthly mortgage payment completely. If you own your home, you're 62 or older, you may qualify for a reverse mortgage that will help you meet your retirement goals. I have years of experience helping Utah homeowners and will help you find the right solution for your financing needs. With a 10-minute call, I can help you find out how you qualify and how a reverse mortgage can help you. Call me today, Alan Blood, 298-5887. That's Alan Blood with Capital Financial, 801-298-5887, NMLS number 3146.
Hi, it's Sherilyn Eager with the Liberty Lineup Show. As a mom and a grandma, I really care about my family's health. Over the years, I've been the one to find the doctors and services. So if you're like me, I was deeply troubled by the Obamacare mandate and its invasion of my privacy. But now I've found an alternative that gives me and my family freedom from insurance. It's called Medical Cost Share, and we absolutely love it. Medical Cost Share exempts us from the Obamacare mandate, including the IRS penalties. And we can choose and keep our doctors and hospitals because there are no networks, no HMOs, no PPOs, and we can take it with us anywhere in the country. It even includes naturopathic and other alternative treatments. I love that the shared expenses do not include abortion services or other socially objectionable practices. And the best part is it costs a whole lot less. For a special offer for our listeners, go to medicalcostshare.com/opt-out now. That's medicalcostshare.com/opt-out now. It's not insurance, it's better.
Why do we sit down when all should be standing? And why do we back down at the critical moment?
Well, if you've been listening to the discussion so far, I think we're all standing at this point, and we're very appreciative of our guest time, Sheriff Richard Mack and Vice Presidential candidate Scott Bradley with the Constitution Party. And I want to especially thank our show sponsor, Medical Cost Share. We want to remind you that Congress is not likely to do much about Obamacare in the near future at any rate, but we can do something about it. And if you go get medicalcostshare.com/opt-out now, you can save yourself from the increased premiums that are happening all over, from one state to the next, and in some states worse than others. And you can also be free of any penalties. And we hope that you will go do this, medicalcostshare.com/opt-out now. And I've got it. Go get it. All right. That is... now bringing us back to the discussion with Sheriff Richard Mack and Scott Bradley regarding SB 276, which is the lands bill that was passed in Utah and which gives authority to the state for the acquisition in return of 100,000 acres, which would probably be the equivalent to a little patch of my backyard. But in comparison to the millions of acres, it hasn't happened yet. 3 years down the road, it is supposed to happen, contingent upon what we do to bring a state BLM into play. And so I had mentioned the point about the bill taking away the enforcement authority of the sheriff with the wild animals aspect of it. But to me, the wild animals aspect is exactly what is causing so many of the ranchers and the lands rights advocates to stand up and speak out, because when you have environmentalists and a Senator Harry Reid, who is now capturing millions of acres at Gold Butte that the Bundys were grazing on, and then now proclaiming that they have to remove the tortoises so that they can do whatever they're doing on that monument, and one can only guess. And then they can't, of course, have cows on the other area of the Bundy's ranch grazing land, because we all know that tortoises and cows don't get along, but they do, because tortoises love cow pies. Okay, that is the update. So let's go from there, gentlemen.
I think we should.
Sherilyn, I wonder if I might make a comment to some degree about.
Well, that's what we wanted to ask you, Scott. To before we went to the break, Sheriff Mack said that the bill does not take away power from the sheriffs, and so we wanted to see if you had any comments on that.
Let me just real quickly before Scott goes in.
Yeah.
I'll read the bill, what it says.
Yes,
quote,
please.
Subsection 4D, quote, nothing herein shall be construed as enlarging or diminishing the responsibility or authority of a state-certified police officer, which every sheriff is, in performing the officer's duties on public land.
Okay. So,
except...
Go ahead, Scott.
I'll quote enough. This is kind of like a Soviet-style constitution. If you read the last constitution that we helped the country write, it was the Iraqi constitution, and they have stuff in there like, you have freedom of speech as limited by law. Okay, now reading off of line 350, beginning with 4A, it says, except as provided in subsections 4B and C, the local sheriff is the primary law enforcement. Mack talked about this, authority with jurisdiction on public land to enforce this chapter. Okay, then you read over to the beginning on line 353, the director, meaning the DLM, may employ and utilize within the DLM certified peace officers that, if and when deployed, will be the primary law enforcement authority with jurisdiction on public land to enforce this chapter and rules issued in pursuant to subsection 1. Okay, now, and it goes on into the wildlife stuff that Sherilyn's been talking about. But so it's a kind of like except as provided, kind of like in Iraq's constitution. You have the freedom of speech except as limited by law. So it does specify that the sheriff is the primary law enforcement authority, except the director may employ and utilize within the DLM certified peace officers when deployed will be the primary law enforcement authority in jurisdictions on public land to enforce this chapter and rules. So here we have a hope that the sheriff will be able to remain engaged. But if the DLM takes it in their heart and mind, based upon which philosophy captures it, they can set forth, apparently. And again, it's confusing. I mean, this is one of those things, as the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. And so I am concerned that it could be an unelected, independent bureaucracy that is, as we talked about, creating regulations, enforcing those regulations, and adjudicating those regulations. And I would like to see clarity come to this. And I just believe that...
And I'll amen that.
Too much. Say again? I'm sorry?
I'll amen that.
Okay, yeah. Richard and I think, are on the same page about this thing. I think it's going to take more than a little bit of tweaking. But again, Representative Noel told me that it's a work in progress. He thinks that, it could be worked out. And a lot of people really like Mike. Boy, that's an election slogan. Anyway, and he's an amicable kind of guy. We've had great exchanges. But, I think back of what Jefferson said in 1798, that, we can't just look at an individual, no more be said about confidence in man, but bind him down from mischief with the chains of the Constitution. A lot of people, like I say, love Mike and think his heart's in the right place on this and are trusting that he's going to do the right thing. But I think it needs to be specifically, unequivocally, and no wiggle room about where we're going with this, instead of this as the Lord giveth and the Lord take away. And I would rather bind them down from mischief with the chains of the Constitution. And again, there's so many things that are loose ends on this thing. I just have to encourage us to kind of say, okay, let's take the land back, but let's have a plan that doesn't leave it open to the environmentalists or whoever, the tortoise lovers or whatever, running the whole thing and really crushing what really should be going back into the hands of the people for production, distribution, and the wealth of not only the people but the state and the whole nation would benefit by putting this in the hands of the people. And I think the way it's written, it's not ever going to get to that point.
Okay.
The DLM is going to stand in the way of that, any transfer beyond 200 acres.
Right.
And it's just not going to happen.
Okay, so I wanted to get on to another point. There was when people were really starting to learn about this bill. They had a meeting up at the Capitol held by Representative Mike Noel, and people were asking questions from the audience about should we trust this bureaucracy created but named the DLM, and the lawyer for the Utah Association of Counties, Mark Ward, spoke about that. And so we're going to play that clip real quick of what his response was is about if we should trust them.
Now I come to the core of what I want to say. Inherent, the bedrock philosophy of this is that the states are sovereign. This is the United States. We should always refer to our government in the plural. It's not a singular monolithic authority. It's the states. But when I hear rhetoric like this that implies the state can't be trusted either, I'm sorry. We have to plant our faith in the state of Utah. Yes, sir, there has to be a DLM. If there's no DLM, if there's no management structure, what do you have? You have chaos. You have anarchy. You have the absence of law, which...
Okay, so if you don't have the DLM, you have anarchy and the absence of law. First, I want to go to Dr. Bradley, and then we'll go to Sheriff Mack if you have any comments on that. So, Scott, what do you think?
We're getting close to the end of the hour.
So we both need about a minute or two each on that.
Okay, well, I was at that meeting. I heard those words spoken with my own ears live and in person. And honestly, the state, whether it's a federal state or a state or a fascist state somewhere, is still the state. The purpose of government, according to the Declaration of Independence, is to secure God-given rights. And the Communist Manifesto contradicts that completely. Abolition of private property is one of their tenets. In fact, it's the first tenet of their 10 points. And this idea that the state, as a government entity, can be more trusted than the federal government, I think is absurd. I think that we need to recognize that the people really are what this is all about in preserving God-given rights. And I think this is nonsense to think that we've got to turn it over to the Fuhrer with the Fuhrer principle, as would be in the Nazi handbook, and march to the orders of a state agency. And the state has a jurisdiction in given areas, and they're injecting themselves into something that I don't believe that there's a natural inherent boundary there that says they've got to be there. I think it could be on much smaller levels, and Mack has proposed county levels, and that's probably a good start to go down to, but ultimately and finally, I think that the intention of the founders was to have it in the hands of the people. So I think that this idea of the state is the Fuhrer, and we've got to get in line and march with uplifted hand, I think is a fallacy. I don't know, Mack, I maybe didn't leave you enough time. You ought to say something.
Okay, thank you, Scott. Go ahead, Sheriff Mack.
I agree with Scott's comment. It is a fallacy, and we need to be careful with this. And I think the state has gotten too excited about creating this law because of having to take back the land and all of a sudden becoming owners and managers of land that the federal government should not have in the first place. So that's that's the good news of all of this. Do we need to work on this bill? Yes. And I'm ready to work with Scott and Mike Noel and the sheriffs of Utah in making this a better law. And I think that there's good news here, and there's some bad news, and we need to fix the bad news. And I'm ready to go to work to help them.
Are you okay with the word "accept" in these circumstances in the bill,
on the
Sheriff Mack?
Not entirely, no.
Okay.
We need to look at that.
Great.
All right, gentlemen, we want to thank you both for your time here today. We know you're busy. And Sheriff, tell us how they can get in touch with you and join your organization.
Well, thanks. Yes, everybody listening to this can become a member of the CSPOA Constitutional Sheriff. We need people involved in the process, and that's why we had our training there. So just go to CSPOA, CSPOA.org, CSPOA.org, and become a member and get our freedom tools at the website.
Okay, and Scott, tell us how to get in touch with you.
Well, of course, if you want to go to the Castle campaign, Castle2016.com, that's the presidential ticket. My personal website that seems to have ups and downs and everything, but it's Freedom's Rising Sun. Think of the rising sun on the back of George Washington's chair in the convention of 1787. freedomsrisingsun.com, and we've got lots of changes and updates and things. Go there daily because it'll look different every single day, and we'll continue to present about this particular bill around the state to people that want to see. I mean, I've got a presentation of 120 some odd slides that we go through with people on this to help them understand why I have concerns about it, and it's much broader than we were able to even to discuss today. We gave kind of a broad brush today.
Thank you both.
Anyway.
We'll have you on again. Both of you have a wonderful day.
Make sure to subscribe to the Defending Utah YouTube channel. And also, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Gordon's Carpet Cleaning. If you want the job done right, call Gordon's Carpet Cleaning, 801-368-0140. That's 801-368-0140. We also want to let you know about the editor lady. She will help you publish your book or do any editing for a price you won't believe. Give the editor lady a call at 801-948-3667. That's 801-948-3667. Or email her at theeditorlady@gmail.com. We all know that we need to get prepared for job loss, disasters, and just plain life. You need to go to emergencyseedbank.com. That's emergencyseedbank.com. Enter coupon code DEFEND.UT to get your deep discount on Urban Emergency Seed Bank of 23 varieties of non-hybrid, non-GMO seeds, double hermetically sealed in Mylar for seeds that last for decades. emergencyseedbank.com, coupon code DEFEND.UT.